Hello, and welcome to the Canadian Story, where we discuss what Canada is, what Canada could be, and what Canada should be.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Canadian Story. My name is David Parker, and I'm here with my co-host, Zach Gerber and Selena Paley. Welcome to the show, Selena.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Well, I've met you a number of times now at various different freedom rallies and Take Back Alberta events, and you graciously interviewed me at the most recent APP debate for the UCP leadership race that's going on. But I'd like you to share with the listeners a bit of who you are, why you started Freedom Central Canada, and a bit of your story before we get into the freedom stuff. Who are you? Like, what made you the person who's become a champion of freedom? What's your story?
A champion of freedom. I love that. Thank you so much. Yes, I definitely am a champion for freedom. So a quick brief history about how I got here, basically who I am. I have a educational background in human resources. I have a diploma. I worked in HR for a number of years, and then I went into corporate banking and then investment banking after that. But the reason that I became concerned with what I was seeing throughout the pandemic, the assault on employees' rights, fundamental human rights, things like that, is because I studied it in great detail with my education. So I was fully aware of sort of the assault, the injustices, and the downright, disregard for our rights, our human rights, the labor code, everything that was put in place that I studied, that was ingrained into me to appreciate before everything else when it came to how do you treat your employees, what kind of respect do you give to them from an employer-employee relationship standpoint. I took my job in HR really seriously, and a huge part of what I did was to ensure that the employees were happy and that they were respected, and that those particular laws that are in place to preserve their rights came first. They were paramount. So when I saw them slowly slipping down the priority ladder, and federal mandates taking a step at the top for absolutely everything, it really concerned me. And I felt like I needed to ring the bell because, the arguments that were being presented to me contradicted everything that I had learned and knew up and until that point. So I was having, it was just a really almost like an existential experience. Is this really happening? Trying to undo all the learning and relearn, put me in that position to be a little bit more vocal about, hey, I think that there's something wrong here.
Well, but you haven't just been vocal. Like, it's not like you just stood up against your employer or you took a stand in your local community. You've decided to become a voice, right? And this is something that Zach and I talk about a lot. And I like your thoughts on this, Zach, to kind of help build out this question. But there's this whole group of people across this country, Sean Newman, Drew Weatherhead of the Social Disorder podcast, who have suddenly created these mass followings of people who are listening to what you say. The Canadian Story is a very small version of this, but the Western Standard is a very big version, right? Which is another one of my projects that I'm helping with, obviously. What do you think it is? And Zach, I'd like you to build out this question a bit. What do you think it is that suddenly made so many of us come out and say that we didn't, it's not like we were there with loud voices and big followings.
Right. Do you want me to build out the question, or do you want me to answer it for me?
Yeah, I want you to answer it for you, and then let's make this a discussion.
Yeah. So for me specifically, I felt like I didn't, to be honest, have a choice. For the people who have been listening to the podcast long enough, they probably know my background. I come from the music industry. I'm a record producer. I tour with bands. Politics, even like society as a whole is something that 2.5, 3 years ago I was very unengaged from. It wasn't a priority to me. I didn't feel like it needed to be a priority for me. I just loved making music and making records. But then I had a whole bunch of my rights taken away, like basic freedoms that you're supposed to have in a Western democracy. I wasn't allowed to go to restaurants. I wasn't allowed to travel. And then I watched a whole bunch of other people have rights like that taken away. And some other rights that I didn't experience personally. I know one mother in particular who wasn't allowed to go see her son play his sport because she wasn't vaccinated. And it all happened so fast. And I had to make a decision. I had to either decide that even though I felt like this was wrong, I was just going to let it happen, or I had to decide that I was going to do something about it. And so I just started talking about it because I didn't notice that many people talking about it. And the more I talked about it in my private social groups, the more I realized that there were a fair amount of people who agreed with me, but were afraid to talk about it because the social climate at that point was very, let's say if you were to stray from the narrative, you definitely opened yourself up for social deconstruction, we'll call it. But I had all these private conversations with people who were like, yeah, this like is really scary. I can't believe this is happening in our country. And there was a lot of, oh, that won't happen. They won't go that far. And then just one by one, those things happened. And it was a conspiracy theory one month and an absolute fact the next month. And that scared the shit out of me. So I did what I did, and I started talking about it publicly because I wasn't convinced that our country was going to slow down the trajectory we were on without at least people talking about it publicly. And so that's why I personally am here doing what I do. So I guess we'll turn that over to Selena and we'll hear from her.
Perfect. Now she knows exactly what we want her to answer.
Yeah. No, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Zach, with it just seemed to be ramping up. There didn't seem to be any slowing down. That ball was rolling, and it was getting to the point where it was getting scary. We started using that word a lot. Like, what they're doing is really scary. Like, the thought of this continuing another day is frightening to me. It doesn't take an incredibly smart person to start connecting dots. Like, this can't end well. That just seems to be the outcome that my mind keeps going to in every scenario that was playing out, especially for the kids, right? And I have two of them. And my daughter, who's older than my son, was going through the university experience, which was hell on earth for her. She just said, Mom, I just can't hold out anymore. She's in her 4th year of university. She was finishing up her degree. She said, all my friends are getting the shot. So, they're being, it was just mandated at such a high speed too, which also concerned me. Like the speed at which things were moving was really concerning because there wasn't ever given any pause for discussion, any sort of pause for thought. We saw our voices being suppressed, which then, for me, and I'm sure for you guys too, you can speak to this, just made me want to speak even louder. The more that they suppressed, the louder I wanted to become. And when I started putting things to the test out in the real world, and having these direct experiences, not just from talking to people, but in the dealings of going around without my mask on, challenging people at the door who wanted to see my personal medical information. I could see firsthand that we had a serious issue on our hands. I said, okay, well, we need to collectively get our thoughts together. And then I have also background in fundraising. I'm senior administration. These are my experiences working my direct work experience. So I put that to practical application. I never met these people before. I just went to the ledge one day and met Pat King, and then that turned into let's go on a convoy. So, I was just kind of open to wherever the universe wanted to take me, because I know that when I tell the universe what kind of outcome I'm looking for, the universe will bring that back to me. So I just trusted in that process. And here I am today. Here we are. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So there's, I wanted to ask you something specifically, because we have spent a fair amount of time on the podcast deconstructing vaccine mandates from the perspective of what that means constitutionally within the country. I've had conversations, some on the podcast even, with constitutional lawyers talking about what those sorts of mandates mean in terms of our actual law within the country. But you come from a background of HR, which is an angle that we haven't taken yet, I think, on this whole issue. So I guess my first question is, are there other vaccines that you are absolutely required to take in order to be able to be gainfully employed at a Canadian company, or is this something entirely new? And, just give us the breakdown of the perspective of a vaccine mandate from HR.
Right. Okay, that's a loaded question, but a very important one, because there are certain steps that every employer needs to follow when imposing anything on their employee that might threaten their ability to do their job. So the only, it's funny you asked that, because I go through my books all the time, and I was just yesterday. And so what I was reading on employee rights, the only thing that they can really mandate or put as a requirement to your job is drug testing, because of, operating heavy equipment, things like that would involve safety. That's the only time that you can impose such a thing on an employee prior to gainful employment, is you have to pass this drug test before you can operate, blah, 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 whatever. Right. But that's an agreement. It's a contract that's signed between the employee and the employer. And it's kind of like that agreement that happens prior to, and it doesn't impose a threat to any human right because safety, right? Because of safety. So this seemed to be the argument that the politicians were using, our government, it's about safety, it's your health, it's safety. So there was a bit of a gray area there, but I still think that, with respect to this being in contradiction of many human rights, discrimination, like all these things came up prior to, I think that several years of conversations would have had to have happened prior to introducing such a thing into legislation, because it isn't anywhere. It's nowhere. You have race, you have sex, you have religion. So even religion is in a lot of the communications, a lot of the legislation, and they weren't honoring that. Freedom of religion, respect of how you decide, or your beliefs in that religion. These are a lot of things that they would have had to have considered prior to imposing this vaccine mandate, to the point where you would lose your employment over it. So, just to break it down really simple, when we look at, from an employer standpoint, when we look at, what rights does the employer have? We're not even talking about the government here. We're talking employer and the employee. That is separate from the federal government. That employer has every right to, or is obligated to uphold their part of the contract, which basically says, here's all the requirements that you needed to meet in order to be employed here. But now we're going to add this new one, which is really ambiguous, and it threatens and contradicts all of the human rights, labor codes, even the charter. So from an HR standpoint, the charter is always at the top. It's the charter, then it's the human rights legislation, then it's the labor code, and depending on what province you're in, then you got to follow that one. Then your employee policy is like way at the bottom, having satisfied all those other things. Now you can put in your employer policy requirements to the employee. Like, you can't be going on social media and bashing us as a company. Like, these are the kinds of things that you can add. So, every single one of those human rights that has been spelled out, signed, and put into place from a legislative standpoint have all been, what's the word?
Violated.
They haven't been respected. Yeah,
Violated.
that's right. So employees have they have recourse to sue like crazy right now, because you could use any one of those legislations to say, hey, like, I was wrongfully dismissed. And I believe they have been. Yeah.
Okay, so here's a loaded question.
Okay.
Would you consider the vaccine mandate for gainful employment a human rights violation?
Yes.
Wow. That's pretty crazy.
Absolutely.
And that is from your perspective as someone who's worked a long time in HR.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I would ask the question, well, what does that have to do with my ability to type emails?
Yeah. Well, but it gets
from my home.
It gets, from your home, exactly. But it gets to a deeper question of, how did it ever get to the point where we allowed governments to dictate these kind of terms to us? And now that you've been doing all these interviews and have so immersed yourself in the freedom movement, I'd be interested to hear, what have you learned? What have you learned about people? What have you learned about yourself? But most importantly, what have you learned is going on? Like, because you're going to be hearing a lot of stories, some of them true, some of them not, and you're filtering all that and then giving hopefully as much of the truth as you can to your listeners. What have you learned? Share with us what you personally have learned.
Right. Well, I've learned that things don't change unless you actively seek to make them change. So when we were all sitting back watching this unfold, we were quiet. Things were changing, but not for the better. They were changing in what I would have now considered the wrong direction. It was going in the wrong direction. And so, you asked me a lot of questions there, but I'll just touch down on, what have I learned about Canadians? That we are resilient, that we are kind, but we also don't put up with crap. And we are very good at being voices for what is right and doing the right thing by each other and for each other, not just within Canada, but for the world. Canadians have always been advocates for peace and for unity and for fair treatment of people and individuals, because that's how we've been treated in this country for as long as I can remember. We've been treated with respect. We've been given independence and autonomy to live our lives as we see fit, to do the jobs that we want to do, to be given opportunities to move into those jobs if we so choose, to have the ability to have relationships, have children, and feel safe. That safety and security, I think, is what was paramount for a lot of people. They weren't feeling safe anymore. Their security had been stripped. Now their job is on the line. Now their livelihood is on the line. Now, how are they going to afford food? Like, these are all questions I don't think too many people ever considered in their lifetime. And then we had this wonderful influx of immigrants into this country, people who have come from communist situations or situations where there has been tyranny and communism, and they were able to share their stories with us, and they were heeding the warnings, and I was listening. So I think that was key throughout this whole thing, was not to do too much talking necessarily, but to do a lot of listening, because there were a lot of people who came forward to share their experience because they could see what was happening. And, I just have never been one person to be quiet. I'm always asking questions. I've always been inquisitive. I've always wanted to seek an answer, for me to make sense of whatever was happening, any situation. I'm always questioning. So that's just me personally. So it seemed natural for me to kind of fit into this role. But I think the most concerning thing for me was when I realized that the media that a lot of people tune into and have relied on and trust, for their credible and truthful information about what's going on in their communities and in their country and in the world, was just a bunch of crap. It was just a bunch of lies. And, that was probably the most concerning thing to me, because I thought, oh my gosh, this is way bigger than I could have even imagined. They've absolutely monopolized the media now. And I was in a position where I could see the truth in front of me versus the lies being told on the TV. And that was a weird thing to have to go through too. For you guys, how did you feel about doing that? When did you come on to that sort of piece of it all?
Well, Zach, I'll let you speak to it a little bit more, because okay. For me, to put it very simply, for a very long time, I thought this was just incompetence. I would say even up until this spring. But as time has moved forward, and the reason that I didn't get the vaccine is very different than a lot of people. I just don't like being told what to do, ultimately. And that comes from my Scottish ancestry on both sides. Zach's my cousin, so he's got a lot of that blood in him too. We grew up talking about William Wallace and like loving patriotism, and like we were young boys who liked swords and guns and wars and freedom and all those things. So that was pretty entrenched in us, but even in our blood, right? The Scottish people are very hard, notoriously hard to suppress. And so for me, it was that. But as I've looked at it, I think the moment where I woke up, and I've always known the media lies, right? Because I've been in politics since I was 14. Like, the media lying is like Stephen Harper was teaching me how the media lies when I was 23, right? I was watching them lie about him. So I've been yelling and screaming about this stuff for a long time, but it's been I guess for me, the fascinating part has been watching everyone wake up to what I've already known about the media and so much of corruption and government, the things I've been fighting. I've been fighting corruption since I was in Danielle Smith's war room in 2012 because I hated Alison Redford, because I hated the PCs because they were corrupt and they were the conservatives, right? Like, this has been my world. I believed in the corruption of the elite all my life. So I guess it hasn't been that weird for me. But the moment that troubled me was how many people just folded like cheap tents when pressure came. And the government didn't even barely have to do anything. So that to me, that was the part that broke me. But then it was the truckers that revived my spirit, to be honest, because I'd lost hope in this. You can ask Zach. I completely, but even before the mandates came in, I had lost hope in Canada. Well, Zach, why don't you speak to that time for both of us? Because you were very much not that. You were soldiering on.
Well, I was soldiering on again because I felt like I had to. I asked myself like a very simple question. I said, because it looked like there was nothing that was going to be done about it. So again, I had to ask myself a question. I asked, am I going to go down swinging, or am I going to lie over and take it? And I guess maybe it's that Scottish blood, but I was like, I'm going to take one or two down with me as I go. And so I was swinging. Like, I was swinging back before the trucker convoy when all the mandates were in place. But David is right. There came a moment right before the convoy where I was like, I think we're screwed. I think we're not going to be able to move this over. I don't think we're going to be able to stop what's happening. And then the convoy happened. And at least in my lifetime, I consider that convoy the most exciting thing that has happened in Canada.
Oh yeah, I don't think there's any doubt.
I think it's for two reasons. I think it is the most important thing that has happened in Canada in my lifetime, in my almost 30 years now. And at least for me, in my experience, it was the moment when I stopped being hopeless, because I'd been yelling into the abyss for, I don't know, maybe a year at that point, right? And nothing had changed. And then these brave truckers show up to Ottawa, and Francois Legault lifts his unvaccinated tax, but it had nothing to do with the convoy. And Saskatchewan drops its restrictions, but it had nothing to do with the convoy. And the stupid leader, Erin O'Toole of the Conservative Party, who I absolutely despise, all of a sudden wasn't the leader of the Conservative Party anymore. And I was like, oh my goodness, these are real, measurable, actual things that are now stepping in the correct direction. And from the beginning of the pandemic up until the point of that convoy, we had only been going in the wrong direction. And all of a sudden we started seeing victories. And not only were we seeing victories, but we were also seeing in very real and clear context, because the medicine thing was tough. The information about, let's say, vaccines, it takes a lot of time to decipher it, right? You have to be willing to look at medical papers. I'm not a doctor. Like, this is not my field. I'm a record producer, right? This is not what I do. It's tough to see the lie between what the science is actually reporting and what the media is reporting, unless you spend a lot of time looking what's going on. But with the truckers, it was easy because it was all over social media. You go on social media, you go on Instagram, and it's people playing hockey in the streets, and it's people partying and singing "Oh Canada," and it's people hugging each other. And then you go watch CBC, and it's a bunch of racist white homophobes who hate the country Canada and are Nazis and want all gays to die or something like that. I don't know. And it's just like, all of a sudden, the other thing that event did is it made it easy for people who hadn't yet seen that the media was lying to see that the media was lying, because it was all over the internet. They couldn't take it down fast enough because there were so many people there. It just kept flying out onto the internet. And you watched that, and you watched what happened in the media, and they were two entirely different stories. And so I watched a lot of people who hadn't yet come onto the idea that something weird was going on in our country all of a sudden go, huh, that's weird. And that changed everything. So you, to my understanding, went to the convoy, right? What was that experience like for you? Because you would have actually been on the physical ground where the event was happening, and I'm sure tuned into what the media was saying. What was it like there? And what was it like to watch how you were being lied about?
What was it like being on the ground? It was cold, but there was a certain warmth that was present as well. So even though we had no access to bathrooms, running water, or heat or food, we managed to rely on one another in a capacity that I've never seen before. And that is where a lot of the hope came from, not just on our way to Ottawa, but when we got there as well. Canadians were there just to help each other through the day, help each other get through the day, hug each other, talk to one another. We've been suppressed. We weren't able to do that up until that point. We weren't able to have these conversations. We weren't even able to gather. We couldn't even go to our families' homes, if you guys recall. So to be down there in that, I want to say it was like a bubble, because I had no idea what was going on outside of that. We were so focused on getting the truth out, getting the word out, talking to people, observing what was happening. And there were just so many people. There was a lot to observe. But not for 1 minute did we feel that we were unsafe. Not for 1 minute did we feel that we were in any danger. There was none of that. There was absolutely zero of that. So we did our very best to show that and to be very loud about that, because we knew that they were trying to paint a certain picture that was false. So was it a happy place to be? Yes. I met a lot of people from Quebec. We had a lot of good conversations, even with the language barrier. That was a really interesting revelation for me, knowing that they actually cared about the rest of Canada and that they didn't feel the way that the papers, the media had spun it all these years, that Quebec doesn't hate us. They don't actually, they feel quite the opposite. And so that was an interesting realization for me as well. The feedback that we got from everyone down there, everybody had a story. Everybody had a heartbreaking story. And the level of trauma that had been inflicted on Canadians up until that point was concerning. It was even bigger than I had even expected or anticipated. The level of trauma that everyone had gone through, because everybody had a different story. They either had a vaccine, had a reaction to it. They lost somebody due to it. They lost a job. Their family, they've been divided from their families. Like, the stories were terrible, but the renewed hope that was evident down in Ottawa in those streets and with the truckers, we just knew that the outcome was going to be good.
So how long were you there for? Let's start there.
We arrived there on the eve of the 28th. So we were on the ground on the 29th, and then we left on or around the 10th of February because we went down to the Kuntz border. I don't know if you guys are.
I went to the Kuntz border. I actually spoke at the Kuntz border with Zane. Actually, at the time, it was his birthday, yeah. And we went down and we're rallying the troops there. No, I was like, yeah. But I actually have a different question, because I know everyone probably asks you about what happened, but what are you doing now? Share with our listeners how you're keeping the fight up. And more importantly, perhaps, you are one of the most connected people in the freedom movement now. You're literally broadcasting to tens of thousands of people. My video that you did the interview with me has more downloads than a lot of our podcast episodes do, right? Like, so you're a big voice, but what are you seeing? What are you seeing in the freedom movement right now? I'll give you maybe my reflections on it. I see a lot of discouragement. I see a lot of people that haven't figured out what their role is now. we're all looking back at Ottawa and Kuntz and talking about it still, which is awesome. And we should be, because it was such a, as Zach said, probably the most significant event in Canadian history up to this point. But the past is the past. And we have there are future wars coming that we need to prepare for, perhaps even this fall, with the Prime Minister coming out and saying that if we don't hit 90% booster uptake, that he's going to impose more sanctions on Canadians.
Mm-hmm.
What do we do, and what do you see the state of the freedom movement is? Are we going to be capable of fighting this? Where is there hope, and what are maybe some of your concerns?
Right. Well, you know, the Prime Minister likes to give us what I consider like these little sound bites. You know, he goes around and he says certain things. And one of the things that I'm actually liking that he's saying, that I think that, you know, we can use to our advantage, is that there's a threat to our democracy. They keep saying this now. This is what I was saying all throughout the convoy, was that this is you know, a threat to our democracy, and we're here to defend it. And now they're saying it. Now they're the audacity to say that they're defending our democracy. But that's, I think, going to work for us, because at the end of the day, the democratic process, a democratic society, involves integrity. It involves respect. It involves, you know, working together cohesively and respecting each other, not just for, you know, what we bring to the table, but for our diversity as well. And so that has not been the case with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. We have enough sound bites from him to suggest otherwise. The divisive language that he was using, you know, the assault on our bodily autonomy. You know, he was at the podium, you know, talking like he was a doctor, giving everybody medical advice. So, you know, these are the kinds of things that we will remember and we won't forget, and that just further prove his hypocrisy through all of this. So, to answer your question, I think that integrity is going to be what keeps any of these systems together. And if we challenge that on a regular basis, like, hey, you know, what's the point of you being in this role, in this job, in this organization, in this regulatory body, if you're not there to show some integrity and to hold up these rights? And I think that that's going to be paramount for everybody going forward. If we're going to believe in the democratic processes that are in place, the voting, you know, politics, levels of government, provincial government, all of that, if we're going to keep going in that direction, we need, as a society, as a voter, to say first and foremost, you know, are you going to uphold the integrity of this institution? And are you going to respect the rights of individuals first? That's going to be my question to every candidate from now and going forward, is where do you stand on the rights and the individual liberties awarded to everyone in this democratic society? Because, you know, we don't want any more threats to our democracy. I think that the majority of Canadians were enjoying life pre-pandemic, pre-COVID. And so when it comes, what it boils down to, from my observations, is the integrity. Once you challenge somebody on that, they have a decision to make. They have a choice. They have a decision to make. And we saw quite a few those elected officials start stepping down. Hey, David, remember the Saskatchewan health and they're starting to step. Christine Elliott, we saw them like exit stage left, but, you know, they still can make the right decision and do the right thing. There's still time, I think.
So what do you see as your personal role in this war that we're fighting for our democracy, let's call it?
Well, I like to think of myself as an accountability partner. I truly believe in accountability and responsibility. That's a huge relationship that a lot of our politicians are missing right now. That their actions and their inactions also have consequences. And they're in positions where they need to listen to the people. So the louder we get, the faster that they will act in that direction. So I encourage people to continue to have those conversations, because that's what they're there for. They're there to field the feedback and the comments, and to direct and make decisions, you know, that are in line with the majority of what people want in this country.
Are you in your and you're traveling to these events and seeing politicians everywhere and watching what's going on in your new role as basically one of the key, well, as the key person for Freedom Central Canada. Mm-hmm. What are you seeing the people doing? Maybe share some stories of hope, right? Because I think there's a lot of people, we need more hope. A lot of people need more hope, right? And I'd love to, I know I have hope because I hear all these stories, but I want you to share the ones you're hearing because that just gives me more of an arsenal to share.
Stories of hope. Yeah. I think that's a bit of a roller coaster ride. I think it has ups and downs, certainly. But that was a word we heard a lot of on our journey to the convoy and there down in Ottawa and following the weeks too, was that it gave Canadians a renewed sense of hope. People were like not all was lost. So some of the stories that we heard were just that that people would see us going around in society without wearing masks. They would see us exercising our rights, and they would try it in their own communities and would have success, and they would feel empowered. So there was sort of a sense of empowering the Canadian people as well that came from that. And, taking responsibility for yourself and your part and what you can do at your community level was key. And so after Ottawa, when I got back, I said, look, I don't think that anyone ever thought we were going to stay there indefinitely. I mean, there was talk about it, but it was, it was just more realistic to have the intention of just, hey, sounding some alarms, but eventually we have to go home. We have to go home to our families. It's cold. They put up all these blocks with the money and everything like that. So, after we got home, we said, okay, now's the time to form your groups in your own communities and start there. Because if we're ever called upon, to do something like this again, everybody's going to have a strong knit group within their communities. And it's a lot easier to gather one sort of lead person from each group than millions of individual Canadians, right? So if we are all feeling like we're on the same page here, then you will form your groups naturally. The leaders will naturally sort of present themselves within those groups. And then, then it's going to be a lot easier to move things forward collectively.
So basically, you would say that what you're seeing is groups organically forming across this country that are building a resistance against the tyranny of the state. That's good. It's good to hear. I think, go ahead, Zach.
David mentioned earlier about booster uptake. And as if Mr. Trudeau can't get any weirder or funnier, he even in his speech about booster uptake says, once we get to 80, 85, 90%, it's like, well, okay, which one is it, right? Because there were so many moving goalposts when it was, the original round of vaccinations. It's like, if we get to 60%, we're good. But actually that's 70 and now we're 85. And so my question is to you, having heard, I'm sure you probably heard that speech, having heard that, how likely do you think it is that Canada is going to face another assault on individual freedoms and rights this fall? And how do you think Canada is going to respond if we do?
That is a great question. And a perfect segue, I think, to this topic is that Alberta is the province that is going to change things in that direction. Alberta is the anchor of Canada. We heard this a lot on the convoy. Pat King, was saying it all the time as well, is that, Alberta's the heartbeat. It's the beating heart of Canada. It's going to be where the change happens, and it's going to have a trickle effect. So our focus when we got back was, okay, how can Alberta be sort of the mentor for all the other provinces when it comes to changing how we look at Canadians, what Canadians want, and our individual rights and freedoms as they pertain to, how we govern ourselves in this country. And so I said to Cody, we should focus on Alberta because there's going to be an election coming up. And, we need to start asking these candidates how they feel. Like you never thought that this would have to be a question, but like, how do you feel when it comes to respecting people's rights in this country? Like, where do you stand on the charter? Like, do you feel like it's important, or do you think like, we have to have a relationship with our federal government first and make sure that everybody's in line, and then we can start respecting their freedoms? Like, where do you sit there? So, when Danielle came out and she started talking about the Sovereignty Act, I was like, oh, this is perfect. Like this is a step in the right direction. Whether it was going to work or not, from a legislative standpoint is kind of irrelevant right now. But the fact that we have a potential leader who is vocal about her commitment to upholding and respecting Canadians' rights, Albertans' rights, I guess specifically, that are paramount, and then the federal government kind of comes after, and that seems to be sort of the direction that I think is key to turning this around. I don't know if I answered your question, but I think that Alberta is going to be the place that starts it, and I think that they know that over there in Ottawa, which is why we're now seeing, all these lies again on this assault on Albertans. Like we're again, with the video with Elliot, we're rude and we're insulting and we attack and we're, all these ridiculous things. So the battle is not over, that's for sure. But I think that it's got to start with Alberta, and it's going to have a trickle effect. That's what I'm predicting, and that's what I'm hoping for. And so individually, we need to back and get behind people who put value and who put importance on our rights, and make sure that they are presenting them in a way where we feel that safety and security again, that we don't have to worry about them coming under assault again. Like, we don't want to have to worry about that. We want to be able to live our lives knowing that they're going to be respected at all levels of government and everything that we do.
David, who I'm drawing a blank. Who said courage is contagious on our podcast?
Man, lots of people I feel like have said it, but
Yeah.
There was someone specifically.
It's like basically that almost become a mantra of the movement, I would say.
So the reason I bring that up is I think you're probably right, and I think courage is contagious, and I think Alberta is going to be the stronghold that stands up first. And if something happens at the federal level that Alberta doesn't agree with, I think Alberta might just tell the federal level to get lost and say, well, no, we're not going to do that. And I think having that example in front of us in our country is going to change a lot of other places in this country. And I'm thankful for the role that Alberta might just have to play in whatever happens next. And I go back and forth on this. Like, I feel like I shouldn't, but I kind of look forward to the next thing that's going to happen. I kind of look forward to the next time they try to tell me to do something, because I am unbelievably bolstered in my resolve that I won't be told what to do. And so it's like, man, like I wasn't thinking about it last time, but this time I am thinking about it. So like, good luck. Good luck trying to tell me to put a mask back on. Good luck trying to tell me to do whatever it is you're going to tell me to do next. I just say good luck to you.
Yes.
Okay, so
Zach first.
Pardon me, say that again.
You got to get through Zach first. No, but that was it. We heard that a lot on the convoy, was that Alberta. It was Alberta. Alberta was leading the way. Thank God for Alberta. Like, it was full of Albertans, and it was all Albertans. Everyone that got arrested was from Alberta. And Pat would just say, I don't know, we're just loud and we're proud. And we know that Alberta has not been treated fairly by Ottawa. Especially with those equalization payments, we have always given back to Canada, but Ottawa has not given back to us. They just take. It's a give and take relationship. Alberta's doing all the giving and Ottawa's doing all the taking. And I think we're just tired of it, because, if you want to bite the hand that feeds you, that's gonna get old real quick. We're not gonna put up with that.
I couldn't agree more. I think we have about 5 to 10 more minutes here, and I had a couple more questions that I wanted to ask. I think the most important one is, why are you doing what you're doing? Like not the reasons, but why?
The why. You know, mainly for the kids, for the next generation of Canadians coming up. You lead by example. That's how I've been raised. I've been taught. You know, I'm a Catholic. I believe in the Christian and Catholic foundations. It's rooted in me. You know, always giving back and ensuring that we treat everybody the way you want to be treated, right? With respect and dignity. Doesn't matter what you look like, where you come from, you know. And that's kind of been Canada's staple, you know, is that when people come, immigrants come, they feel welcomed here. We're not here to judge anyone or to discriminate against anyone. And where was I going with this?
Why? But you're saying the next generation. I mean, you want that.
Yeah,
you want that value preserved.
Definitely for the kids. But there's two parts there. So one was that we could see that the children were being targeted. Okay, so that was clear to me unfairly. They were being targeted unfairly. So then when you see sort of that disconnect and your brain can't make those connections, like they're doing this for this reason, although the reason that they're saying isn't, like, we're not seeing that to be true. You know, there seems to be an ulterior motive here. And so when you have lies and when you're doing things that are not based in truth, you have to ask questions to get to that truth till it makes sense to you. So this sort of attack on the children was really concerning. So that was number one for us. We have to stop that first. And then second, this is not going to be their future. This is not, no, we want to have a say in what that future looks like for our future Canadians. And this is not it. This is not even close to being it. So in my mind, I was thinking it's never wrong to do the right thing. So if you just keep, you know, moving forward in doing what's right for yourself, for your citizens, and especially for the children, you can't go wrong.
No, I agree.
People
Zach,
will either
why are you doing
it or they won't.
Zach, what's your reason?
A twofold, I guess. On a base level, I don't like being told what to do. So that's for me. But I must have been such a pain for my mom. I'm sorry, Mom. But so I don't have children myself, but was it Reagan who said freedom is only one generation away from being extinct? I don't know if it was Reagan. It was a US president. And I didn't see that as being true until this particular situation. And I don't think we can really fault Canadians for being passive in our protection of our freedoms, because, you know, I'm turning 30 this year, and until COVID-19 came around, no one really challenged my freedoms, at least in ways that, like, I blatantly saw. But turns out that happens even in Canada. And I plan on being a part of, you know, starting the next generation. I plan on having children, and I would like for those children that I plan on one day having, I would like for them to have the same free Canada that I grew up in, because I'm very lucky to have grown up in Canada. My childhood really was quite amazing. And this is a beautiful place to live. And I'm not going to be satisfied allowing that to be taken from my children. So even though they're unborn, I guess I'm fighting for them now, even though they're unborn. I guess that's my reasoning. That, and just like even the rest of my family watching, you know, it wasn't just me watching my friends being discriminated against, watching my parents being discriminated against. I was like, I don't like any of this. So I guess we're going to have to do something about it. And that's why we're all here. So I guess to kind of wrap this up, there are still people who, there are still people who buy into the narrative like full bore. I'm not actually too terribly concerned about those people. I want to speak to the people who are on the fence, who are who are new to the idea that still new to the idea that something might be strange. What would you say to the people who are just now beginning to deal with the existential crisis of realizing that the institutions that they grew up believing in, like government, like healthcare, like media, are potentially compromised? I think Jordan Peterson said it the best about the convoy specifically. He said Canadians have to make a terrible choice. They either have to agree that these truckers are racists and homophobes and xenophobes and don't believe in science and they're the scum of Canada, or they have to believe that the media is lying, the government is painting them in an untrue light, and all of the institutions that they grew up believing in have become false. That's a terrible decision. What would you say to the people who are grappling with that?
That is a really great question, Zach. That one came up a lot because people were very confused. Why can't I wake up my friends and family? Like, they would use that term, wake up, right? And I just said, everybody comes to that place in their own time. It's nothing that you can force. But what you can do is show them. You can show them information. And Jordan's right. They still have to make a choice at the end of the day. And people who choose to stay in La La Land, if you want to call it that, people who choose to stay there think that that's where their security and their safety lies. And that's unfortunate, because what that tells me is that as a society, we are raising Canadians to feel like they need to depend on external things in order to feel that safety and security. Not here. It's all right here. You have it. You've had it this whole time, Dorothy. You can go home at any time. But the scary part about leaving that safety and security, or what they believe to be safety and security, is that they have to now move into that place, that abyss. You can't get to the other side without staring into that abyss. And it's scary. It is scary in there. You don't know what you're going to see. You don't know how you're going to feel. But once you trust in your ability, yourself, you'll be able to do that. And what I try to tell people is we'll be there waiting for you on the other side. We will be there for you. You have to walk through it, though. That's a personal journey. That is an individual choice. Some people aren't going to make it. People who are on their 4th and 5th boosters at this point, I say, I don't think we can help them. I don't think that we can help those people. The people on the fence, yes. We can't judge. We can't say, see, I told you so. We just have to be there for them with open arms, understanding, and acceptance. And that is how we are as Canadians. That is how we are. We don't change. We stay there rooted in those values and in those convictions. And we are going to be there for everybody whenever they decide they're ready to make that leap.
Absolutely. And I think you said something incredibly important there that I want to highlight, because we've talked so much about division in our country, right? And we've blamed so much division on the current Prime Minister's office. But if we, on this side of the argument, come at people who didn't see it the way we saw it, but are beginning to see things differently now, if we come at them with "I told you so," with judgment, with any sort of hostility, we are the ones sowing that division. So we can't be doing that, because we're trying to pull our country back together here. And one of the things that I love to say to people is you have to have conversations with people you disagree with, and respectful ones. And if we from this side, I don't want to say aisle because it's not a political thing, but if we from this side of the argument extend any amount of hostility to people who are now curious about why we think the way we think, we are only damaging our movement. We're damaging those people that we're extending that hostility toward, and we're damaging our country. So I think it's incredibly important what you said. We have to be there and be kind. And if we can be there and be kind, I think we can put our country back together. So I want to thank you for being there and for being kind and for everything that you do. And really quickly, before we go, where do people find you online, and how do they get connected to what you're doing?
Well, you can find me on social media. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. I'm on T Well, as David mentioned, we have a large following on Facebook. That's where we started, but we have now branched out. We have our website, freedomcentral.ca. We're also on Twitter, YouTube, Rumble, TikTok, Facebook, all the big ones, and hopefully pretty soon branching out into larger media. We're looking forward to following some opportunities there. So stay tuned, everybody. Woo.
Did you get shadow banned on TikTok yet?
How would I know?
Well, so for us in our particular situation, we had a certain doctor who shall remain nameless, because every time we say his name, we get in trouble online.
Okay.
Come on the podcast,
No.
and
I know which one.
yeah, and we were doing thousands and thousands and thousands of views every TikTok. And we watched that go to about 40 views in
and we can't get above 40 views now.
So that hasn't happened to your TikTok yet?
It's happened to pretty much all of our platforms, except for Instagram. Instagram seems to be ticking along pretty good there. But what we decided we were going to do to avoid that is anything controversial, we're now putting on Rumble. Anything political on Facebook, we're going to keep it nice and clean. We are fully aware of the assault to our free speech and our freedom of expression right now. We're painfully aware of this. We're painfully aware of the tactics that the social media conglomerates are using. And it's you have to be extremely creative and very resourceful and extremely adaptable too right now in these challenging times. And I told Cody, I said, every time they move the line, we unfortunately have to move with them. Wherever that line goes, we kind of have to hover above and below, because everybody's in jail, everybody's been banned, everybody's restricted, everybody's shadow banned. Like, this is just what we're living in right now. Do we have to use these social media platforms to get to those people that you're talking about that are on the fence? Yes, unfortunately, we still have to try to use these social media platforms to do that. Would I like to kick Facebook to the curb? Yeah, I don't know how anybody runs a successful business treating people like that. You have it today, but you don't tomorrow. I don't want to work with Facebook. I can't work with Facebook. But what we can do is jump through all these hoops just in order to keep focused on the goal, which is to try to wake as many people up as we can. Right.
So one last question then. Where do people go to find your nitty-gritty details that don't belong on the rest of the internet? Is that your Rumble page?
That is our Rumble page, and very quickly going to become the place where I talk a lot about vaccine mandates, adverse reactions, things like that. We can't talk about how big pharma makes billions and billions of dollars at the expense of your health, all these things that would just get me taken off rather quickly. So there's still things we need to talk about, though. And that's the part, that I struggle with the most, is like, we still need to talk about this, but how, right? So again, being resourceful, having these conversations with you guys, coming, doing collaborative work to try to maybe start like a separate independent media company that doesn't censor. This is where I see the trajectory going, and it's good. To me, it's good, and it gives me hope, because it means the more that we branch into alternative media, the less dependence people are going to have on the legacy media, the mainstream media, which hasn't served anybody. Has served nobody. Yeah.
Beautiful. All right. Well, everyone, make sure that you check out what they're doing on Rumble, and check out what we're doing on Rumble. And if we disappear from the internet, that's why. And we'll see you all next time. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for listening to The Canadian Story. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at The CAD Story. That's The CAD Story. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it with your friends and family. Let's work together to remind Canadians how great their country is.